Hey guys, brand new day. So today we're gonna talk about perfect. Now, what is perfect? Does being perfect exist? Well, in a world where we have nature, the laws of physics, nothing can actually be perfect, guys. And you know, everybody wants to be perfect. Everybody wants something to be perfect. Everybody wants to be perfect in a certain way, right? However, it doesn't work like that. There's no such thing as perfect. And if you think about it, guys, if something were to be perfect, then it would just be boring. There would be no excitement if something was perfect. And it's something I've been thinking about. So when someone says, "Oh, I want to be perfect," I want to become, like super like flawless, perfect, this and that, right? That's not realistic. That's something that doesn't happen in real life. You know what I mean? It doesn't happen anywhere. There's no such thing as perfect. So how do you deal with that? How do you put up with the fact that you can't be perfect? Well, guess what? That's how human nature is. That's how life is. That's how everything is. You have to come with the fact that nothing's gonna be perfect. You are who you are. Something's not gonna be perfect. It is what it is. If you keep stressing about it, keep thinking about it, then that'll really bother you. Like I said, being perfect is boring. Nobody wants something that's perfect. You can't really do nothing with it. You're pretty much stuck with it. If when something's has a flaw, it does bring some excitement in a way. You might look at it and say, you know what, it's not perfect, but it's interesting. It's something that I can live with. It's something that has character. When something's perfect, doesn't have character. Doesn't have that standout feature that makes it really nice. Whereas when there's flaws and there's imperfections, there's little trade-offs. It makes it a little exciting. Makes it something worth waiting for. So you don't expect something to be like super perfect. And that brings to the last video, one of my last videos that I made about high expectations. That does tie into perfect, because when you expect something to be perfect, automatically your mind's going to be like, okay, this it better be like this, or it's trash, or it's not going to be good. Then when it happens or it comes out or whatever it is, and it doesn't match your expectations to be perfect, then automatically it's gonna be the worst thing you ever seen, heard, or whatever it is, right? Even though it's something that's really, really like amazing, but because you're expecting something to be perfect, it really gives you a point of view that it's terrible. And that's why you just have to stop expecting something to be perfect, or you want to be perfect, or whatever it is. Look, in this, at least in this universe, you can be perfect. Maybe in another universe, maybe, with the laws of physics are different, nature is different. Maybe someday can be perfect, but we can't comprehend perfectness. We can't comprehend that. We can't say, we can't comprehend, for example, this paper thing to be perfect. These, these little rips and everything. This little, this is probably out centered by millions of millimeters that we can't see, but nothing is perfect. When you break it down really closely, nothing's perfect, guys. So it's kind of bittersweet how you have something just flaws, or you're flawed, or whatever it is. I think it's beautiful because it does bring character, has something that in my opinion brings value. Whereas if it's no problems and nothing, then what's the point? You can't really build something off of it. That's why you shouldn't strive for perfection, because that will never happen. Once you strive for that, then all your life you're gonna be chasing that perfection. You're gonna be chasing that dream to be someone that you can't be, unfortunately, or fortunately, because you can't be like that. You can't. You can become better, but you can't be perfect with with zero mistakes, zero flaws. there's always going to be something that's, a trade-off, right? That's why when you're making a choice, there's trade-offs. You know what I mean? One choice is not going to be the, perfect. It's not going to be, no downsides or nothing. That's why every choice comes with its own trade-offs, downsides, positive, negatives, all of that, right? So, I know a lot of people say, "Oh, I wish I was perfect." They don't mean it, obviously. They just saying as a, as a way to say, "Oh, that's perfect. This is really nice," right? But I hope some people understand that, or I hope everyone understands that nothing can be perfect. You might say, "Oh, like he's perfect, she's perfect," or whatever it is, and that's something that means that you look at the person to be has value. Why? Because they're not perfect. They have flaws. They have something that makes into character. They have traits that are flawed, that has something wrong with them, that brings their character out, and makes them interesting, right? Whereas if you were perfect and it's boring, imagine that. Imagine someone being perfect. Obviously, you can't comprehend that because we have never seen them before in our lives, right? So it's hard to comprehend what's, how do you be perfect? How does perfect look like? We can't comprehend that, so if we can't comprehend it, then that means it doesn't exist. If it doesn't exist, then, it may not ever happen. It may not ever happen, guys. It may not ever happen in our lifetime. Even no matter how fast technology grows in the next 50 years, it's nothing can be perfect, right? So that's, the topic of the day. Why you don't want to be perfect. What is perfect? Perfect in general, right? Bye, guys.